Hi, I'm Rebecca Benston. I am the owner of Higher Ground Books and Media, a publishing company in Springfield, Ohio. I am here to talk with you today about author Nancy Flinchbaugh. She is the author of Spiritual Seedlings and a couple of titles that have been published through Higher Ground Books and Media, Letters from the Earth, and her newest release, Awakening. We are going to ask Nancy a few questions about her books. So we'll get right into that. How are you, Nancy?
I'm doing good. Yeah, working from home, pandemic 2020. It's a strange time, but it has been a good time too to launch a new book.
Yes. So you're in the process of launching Awakening, a contemplative primer on learning to sit. Can you tell us a little bit about what the book is about?
Yes, this is a book about learning to sit, which is about meditation and contemplative practices. So this has been something that's been very important to me in my own spiritual life. And a few years ago, I was leading a retreat at one of my friends' churches in Northern Ohio. And I started to create this book, a little booklet actually for the people at the church to explain different contemplative practices. And for several years, I thought, oh, I'd like to make that into a book so that I would have that resource. And so other people would have a simple resource to look at. And so I finally accomplished that. And so that's very exciting to me.
Okay. Um, so what was your inspiration for the book?
Well, the there are two things that inspired me. The the title, Awakening, a contemplative primer on learning to sit. Um, the learning to sit part came from a poem that I wrote when I was going to an eco spirituality class, probably about 9 years ago now. And we were learning a lot about creation, about the heavens, and also about some of our environmental challenges facing the earth today. And our teacher challenged us to write a poem or write something or do a piece of art. And so I wrote this poem, Learning to Sit.
Okay.
And I was inspired by the Hubble scientists. They posed their telescope on what that seemed to be emptiness in the sky. And they found that it was actually millions of galaxies. And I think the same thing happens to me when I sit in silence with God. It seems like maybe I'm in a void, but actually it's a place of infinite possibilities. And I found that if I can stop my mind enough to listen, all kinds of amazing things happen. And the other part of the book was awakening, because I do think as I've learned to sit and meditate, I become much more aware of the earth and of the crisis that we're in. And I think that as you slow yourself down, even not just the crisis of the earth, but also the people of the planet, like right now, we're really in the midst of a pandemic, which was partially caused by climate change, but we're also in the midst of a race issue for the United States, where people are waking up to the big problem we have with racism. And I think meditation is good for both of those things because one, it's very scary. Two, it's very challenging to figure out how do we overcome these problems. I think none of us by ourselves have the answer, but if we slow down enough and listen to God, we can find solutions together. So that's inspiring me. I like to think of myself as a contemplative evangelist. It's so good for me. I'm convinced it's good for other people too. So I want to share that.
Okay. Yes, that sounds really interesting. So how can people awaken with contemplative practices?
Well, it's like any spiritual discipline. You have to make a decision to start. I think you also need a little bit of education, which is something my book will help you with. My book has suggestions for personal practice as well as the suggestions for group practice. So sometimes it's nice to have a group of people. Say you want to learn to meditate, maybe you could start in a meditation group and meet together weekly or monthly and meditate. But also then I think you have to find a time each day at home where you would meditate. And so I was very fortunate that I took a class on leading contemplative small groups and retreats. And as part of that class, which was an 18-month class, I had to meditate for 20 minutes every day. And so I started doing it for a year and a half, and I've done it ever since. And I think that discipline, you just got to show up and start. So I think everybody's a little different. And that's why the book talks about different contemplative practices. Like I also really like labyrinth walking, and maybe sitting meditation is not for you right now. I know when I was a young mother in my 30s, I went to a spiritual director and she told me I needed to meditate. I just laughed because I've always been an introvert. I had two little boys running around at home, and I thought, how am I going to meditate, But then, 20 years later, yeah, meditation's wonderful. And I probably could have started back then. So,
Okay. Um, let's see. I hope this isn't a similar question, but how did this become an important part of your Christian spiritual discipline?
yeah, I think I can go all the way back to right after I got out of college. I worked in campus ministry a couple of years, and then I went to law school. And I went to law school because I was kind of mad at God. I didn't think God was taking care of the world. And I thought that's why I was going to be an attorney. But I was really not happy with the legal reality. Law school is very hard, but it wasn't just that. It didn't feel like it was me. I'm more of a people person. And I was really having a faith crisis at that time. And I think I had majored in religion in college. And I think I just had a lot of questions that had never been quite resolved. And as I started to emerge from that and found a deep faith again, I had the courage to quit law school because I decided that really was not my calling. But I also started to become really interested in the contemplative writers within the Christian tradition. And I think Thomas Merton and Henry Nouwen, both became really important to me at that time. And then in the Taizé services, this was when I lived in Iowa. But it really wasn't until I took that class in contemplative small groups and retreats, and then also took some training to become a labyrinth facilitator, that I really started to learn the value of the contemplative practices. And and then once I'm doing something, I want to share it with other people. So we made a labyrinth at our church and started having labyrinth walks. And I often, like when we're having a retreat at my church, I'll lead little contemplative experiences.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a growing thing that's become more and more important to me in my life.
Um, how will this book help the reader on their life path?
Well, I think especially now in the time of pandemic and this time of soul searching of as a nation to figure out what we can do to overcome our deep racism. I think each of us has a lot on our plate. It's kind of a weird time, it's a scary time. And I think it's more important than ever to find peace within yourself. And I found meditation at first seems a little silly. You're just sitting there doing nothing, you know, trying to shut off your mind. But in these times, sometimes our thoughts are racing, and you can't stop your thoughts. They call it a monkey mind. And if you can
Definitely.
learn to turn all that off and just see yourself in the presence of God, in the heart of love, it's a transformative thing, and people have written about this. Saint Teresa of Avila, who was a nun back in the 15th century, she wrote a book called The Interior Castle, and she writes about that journey, getting to the interior of the castle close to God. And it takes a while. You have to encounter your demons, but she said that was crossing the moat, and you have to keep showing up. So this book will help you, give you some ideas. You can sample different things, maybe try meditation. It gives you suggestions on how to do meditation. The labyrinth, we have a lot of labyrinth outdoor labyrinths, or you can make your own finger labyrinth. Or some of the other practices like gratitude, it's just a real positive way. It's so easy to be negative these days, but like one of the things I do is I start each day with 5 things I'm thankful for. And on Thanksgiving, I do 100 things. So, the different practices in the book will help you think about, how you can deepen your own spiritual life and what works for you. You can sample some of the different contemplative practices and find whatever helps draw you closer to God and into peace in this time. And I guess an important part of that is not just to be peaceful inside yourself, but to engage in meaningful action. Because I do believe that Christians are called into mission. And so one of the things I talk about at the end of the book is a mission group. But I think each of us has to listen for our own calling. And so I don't think the point of silence is simply to be silent and do nothing. It's about being energized by God and led into the path that God's calling you in your life.
Right. Okay. Let's switch gears a little bit and ask you, how did you get started as a writer?
Well, that's interesting. I think I wrote poems when I was young. I was always writing poems, but I never thought of myself as a writer. I majored in religion and sociology in college. I worked in campus ministry, and then I really wanted to work for peace and justice. So I became a mediator, and I got a master's degree. I went back to school to get certified to teach. So I taught school for a few years. Then I got a master's in education. And my husband and I felt a call to move back to Ohio. I was living in San Antonio at the time, and I'd helped start a conflict resolution program at the University of Texas at San Antonio. But anyway, we moved back. When I was in my master's program, I was really interested in career counseling. So we moved back to Ohio, and I got a job working as a fair housing and mediation coordinator at the city of Springfield. But I kept thinking I was called to be a career counselor. So I went back to Texas and had a retreat with some of my friends, kind of a career counseling retreat. And they were going to tell me that, Nancy, you're a career counselor. Instead, they said, Nancy, you're a writer. And I thought, what? They said, yeah, you're a writer. You need to write. So it was kind of a surprise to me. So I agreed to do a book. One of them was using called The Artist's Way, which is it's a program actually for Blocked creatives, but it was a really good book that got me writing every morning, the morning pages. And eventually that led into my first novel, and then my second novel, and then my third novel, and then my memoir. So now it's just it's a creative outlet for me. And I feel like I'm expressing important things too.
What are your other books that you've written besides Awakening?
Well, the first book I wrote was called Revelation in the Cave. And I am a pacifist, and this book is about peace. It's really a interpretation of the book of Revelation, but it's also a crazy story about women who go on an archaeological dig to Turkey. And first they go on the cruise of St. Paul, and then they go to Turkey and they dig up scrolls from the first century that cast light on the book of Revelation. And they're being chased by this crazy guy from a religious think tank with a gun. So there's a little mystery in it and a little bit of violence. And I do believe in happy endings, I'll tell you that. My second book was called Revelation in the Labyrinth. And both of those books have the MAMS, the Magnificent Marvelous Book Club. And so the MAMS in the second book, they don't go out of their country. Instead, they work on a project to start a group home for women in recovery after walking the labyrinth. And they have their own labyrinth. And so it's about a story of healing. One of the mams gets cancer, and so it's about her cancer journey and domestic violence. There's a lot in that book. But again, it's a liberating story. And then Then I wrote my memoir because I started getting letters from the earth. That's probably another interview, but
Yeah.
uh, yeah. So that traces a year of my life where I got letters, received letters from the earth, and my response to them.
Um, how can people contact you and buy your books?
Well, my books are all available on Amazon. Just look up my name, Nancy Flinchbaugh. You can also, I encourage you to check out my websites. I have spiritualseedlings.com. I started to think about what is my goal in writing, and I want to scatter seeds of hope and love and joy. And so the sunflower, you can see my sunflower here, that's my emblem. Yeah, just check out spiritualseedlings.com. You can email me at nancy.flinchbaugh@gmail.com. And I will enjoy talking with you. If you'd like a speaker for your group, I'd be happy to speak and also lead contemplative retreats.
Okay. And the last two titles, Awakening and Letters from the Earth, are also available at the Higher Ground Books and Media bookstore. And that is just on our website. And they're also on Amazon. So thank you for all the great information and all the good things that you're writing about. And that's all I have for you. So
Yeah, so that's true. Check out highergroundbooksandmedia.com. And I'm very grateful. Thank you, Rebecca, for being a publisher and for publishing my books.
thank you.